What is Sedevacantism? Sedevacantism is the theological position that the papal chair is vacant and that there is no legitimate pope currently occupying the Holy See. This applies at least to the current occupant, but in many, if not most cases, this is extended to all apparent popes since the Second Vatican Council. It is this form of Sedevacantism that we will be exploring. By extension, Sedevacantists do not only reject those who they regard as false papal claimants, but the church and hierarchy that they have presided over, because it follows that if these popes were illegitimate, either A. all those who recognise these false popes and their authorities constitute a false church, or B. a false church has existed and therefore has been presided over by false authorities. Hence, we come to the first great misnomer about Sedevacantism, that, like Protestantism or the Eastern Schism, it is somehow a rejection of the Catholic Church and an attempt to break away from it. Yet, whereas Protestantism and the Eastern Schism did break away from Catholicism and became something quite different, those who hold the Sedevacantist position and the traditional Catholic faith represent a continuation of that same Catholic Church and that same Catholic faith that has always been. Indeed, the claim is that, however unlikely or audacious it may seem, it is the Church that Sedevacantists reject which should be likened to Protestantism, because it represents a clear and distinct break in morals, practice, and teaching from the Catholic Church that came before it. This church is called the Novus Ordo, or Conciliar Church, and this is the organisation that most people today would recognise as the Catholic Church, a position that Sedevacantism rejects. Is this a rejection of the papacy? It may appear to be, but Sedevacantists do not believe that they are rejecting a pope, nor the office of the papacy. Indeed, they believe that they are rejecting a non-pope. This is very important to emphasise, because, on the one hand, rejecting a legitimate pope is an affront to Catholicism, whereas on the other hand, rejecting a false pope is nothing less than a Catholic duty. Therefore, to claim that Sedevacantism is false on the grounds that it rejects the papacy is a foregone conclusion that begs the question. The real question is, do Sedevacantists reject a legitimate pope and their church? Only once this question is answered can the matter be settled. In principle, Sedevacantism is not a rejection of the doctrines of papal primacy or papal infallibility, and indeed Sedevacantists draw upon the teaching authority of Catholic popes as proof of their position. Is it a movement? As we have stated, Sedevacantism is a theological position. That is, it is an idea. Therefore, Sedevacantism is not a movement. It is not the title for any particular organisation or group. There are groups that organise themselves on the grounds of their Sedevacantism, but the status, and most importantly, the truth value of Sedevacantism is something distinct. It is something that runs parallel to the groups that adhere to it, but is not dictated by them. This is also why disagreement amongst individual Sedevacantists does not constitute a challenge to Sedevacantism as a position. As a comparison, two men might agree that God exists, but disagree that he is a triune God. Yet, the fact that there is a disagreement between the two men has no effect on the truth value of either of the doctrines. In this case, both doctrines are true. Both men are right about the first doctrine, and one is wrong about the second. But most importantly, we would not say that both men are somehow wrong about the existence of God, simply because they disagree about the Trinity. The same logic applies to Sedevacantism. As a theological position which is distinct from any particular individual, its truth value is not dependent upon complete agreement on all matters of doctrine between all those who accept it. That is also why there is no specific group or spokesperson who speaks on behalf of all Sedevacantists. Therefore, you might ask, if Catholicism must have an authority that speaks on its behalf, can Sedevacantists be regarded as Catholic? Let's look at this more broadly. Is Sedevacantism Catholic? If Sedevacantism is true, accepting it would be a requirement for holding the true Catholic faith. However, the acceptance of Sedevacantism alone is not the measure of Catholicism. The logic is as follows. If Sedevacantism is true, anyone who does not accept it does not hold the true Catholic faith, because they recognise an illegitimate claimant to the Papacy, an illegitimate hierarchy, and, by extension, a false church. If Sedevacantism is true, anyone who does accept it, and holds true to the consistent traditional teaching of the Church, can be said to hold the true Catholic faith, because they reject a false church and remain faithful in their commitment to the true Church, whilst retaining the unity of faith. However, this also means that if Sedevacantism is true, accepting it is not its own guarantee of Catholicism. If, for example, an individual professed themselves to be a Catholic and accepted the Sedevacantist position, but also professed a belief in Thor or the worship of satanic idols, that person would still have made a break from the Catholic faith. Hence, we can return to the question: if Catholicism must have an authority that speaks on its behalf, can Sedevacantists be regarded as Catholic? The answer is yes, because although Sedevacantists have no authority who speaks for them as Sedevacantists, if they are Catholics, they do have an authority that speaks for them as Catholics. That authority is the infallible magisterium of the Church, the consistent teaching of the Church, which has been passed down and codified in canon law, catechisms, councils, papal encyclicals, and other sources, including the writings and practice of the sacred liturgy. In a word, Catholics can appeal to and base their beliefs upon what the Church has always taught. This infallible teaching, which is not distinct from, but intimately interwoven with the proper authorities, be they popes or bishops, is the expression of her dogmatic authority. And Sedevacantists conclude that this same authority teaches them to reject the current claimants to the Holy See. And so we've covered what Sedevacantism is. To go further, we should, of course, consider the evidence and arguments made for the position. However, we must do something else first. Many might protest that Sedevacantism cannot be entertained, let alone proven, because it is a conclusion that cannot even be reached in principle, and therefore must be rejected as false ipso facto. This is another misnomer, but it is important to address. And so, before we consider the specific proofs for Sedevacantism, we shall consider the basic principles that it is based upon, and, by extension, some basic principles of Catholic thought.